Thank you very much. I have to say that I feel a bit excited about this presentation and frustrated at the same time. Because actually my field of expertise is not exactly design anthropology, but I did give classes in, let's say, business anthropology or applied anthropology at our department. But I have some more issues in mind saying about what I do. My primary field of interest is music, more precisely popular music, and even more precisely social environment in which music is produced, used, and so on, especially in venues, music venues, is the primary field of my empirical research so far. But I have some experience in fields of, believe it or not, mathematics and philosophy. So this goes in a way all together into something that I will try to synthesize in this presentation. What I have in mind for this time is simply to go through basic ideas and basic definitions of anthropology, just to explain what anthropology is about, because although there is not much to say about this, it is still a problem in understanding what anthropology actually is and where it comes from. And the second point I will try to make is to relate my presentation to issues which are raised at this conference, and this is innovation based on improvisation by ordinary people, and questions of sustainability, whatever it is in its essence. So the final part of my presentation will be more interesting, I guess, for the audience, but because we have doctoral students, I had in mind to just give you a very short and very boring introduction to anthropology, because I have to do it. So what is anthropology about? Or what is anthropology? The most efficient answer you can find in anthropological textbook is extremely simple, and it says almost everything. Anthropology is what anthropologists do. And the question is what actually anthropologists do. It is not one single issue, not one single thing at all. We do many different things. We do something that is called ethnographic fieldwork. We write and we teach anthropology. Okay, so what? The point of anthropology is that living itself, life, ways of life, is what is extremely important for us. Because we are living human beings, nothing that relates to human beings can be put aside in anthropology, so it means that it is impossible even to imagine anthropology as one single united, let's say, or standardized discipline. It is basically a branch of variety of approaches and putting some light on the question, how do human beings actually live? And what is hidden behind? So in that sense, anthropology is a part of humanities. But it is not only a part of humanities. It is part of social sciences as well. And furthermore, in most general sense, of course, anthropology comprises as well biological existence of humanity or human beings. So it is natural science as well. Now, try to imagine a discipline covering all these spheres, and there is literally no human being who is capable of knowing everything about all these basic issues related to humanity. Biological anthropologists would simply have some knowledge of cultural anthropology. Cultural anthropologists would definitely have to have some knowledge about biological anthropology, although it is not the case, especially not in Europe. And I guess all anthropologists should have basic knowledge, not only in philosophy, but in humanities, especially in history. Although this is, again, not the case. So we are somewhere close to a human being, to humanity, but at the same time dispersed in all possible spots in continuum of human life. So the definition of anthropology I put in my textbook is a bit simple, but again, covering everything I told so far. It is a comparison of ways of life, no matter where, no matter when, so in all places and times, of life and their traces, based, but this is extremely important, anthropological knowledge is based on empirical research with people, among people, in their living environment. And it is at one hand extremely easy. You just go, live with people, and describe their way of life. On the other hand, exactly this banality is what causes problems, because as human beings, we have to use ourselves as instrument of observation. That means if I'm a male in my 50s, I cannot do the same fieldwork as a female in her 20s. But we can do both. And we can get the same, not impression, but empirical results. Although some parts of life we are trying to cope with will be hidden. So for example, for female researchers, some parts of human life are completely closed. So it is impossible even to imagine that a female anthropologist can study male society at Athos, in Orthodox Christianity, monastery, and vice versa. Males are not allowed to participate in female, for example, circumcision rituals. So, of course, everything is partly open, partly closed. But with effort of many different scholars, we can get a pretty much good idea about humanity in general. So the next question is why we need anthropology. Well, I will try to give at least a couple of answers later. But the first question is, yes, all disciplines, all knowledge we consider as scientific knowledge or scholarship in more humanistic perspective is something we don't do as ordinary human beings, although Aristotle would write at the beginning of his metaphysics that human beings are curious by nature, and the first sense we use to somehow give, to get answers for these curious questions we might have is eye and sight. We use sight as at the beginning. So every human being is curious. This is a nature, the very essential nature of humanity. However, only some of us would take this so seriously to say, well, there is a branch of different kinds of knowledge, but there is one specific knowledge about ourselves, about our species, humanity. And this discipline was established somehow, or let's say developed, although we have some, of course, examples of reports of ways of life of different people from ancient times, traveler reports and these kind of sources from ancient Greece, from Arabic countries, and from Chinese travelers from the Middle Ages or even before. But the discipline itself was related to the state. This is extremely important to understand that all disciplinarity in terms of science is activity which was basically initiated by activities of state. In anthropology it is much more clear. The term ethnos, which is the basis for ethnography and later and ethnology, is an ancient Greek term which was not so often used for people. It was actually, as you can see here, used for people who are different, who are not civilized. Enflock, herd, so that means animal-like people. So this is the reason why the term ethnos was not It is a very rare term, actually, in ancient Greek terminology, and it was reinvented in the late 18th century, or reinvented, found anew somehow, by some people who were curious about ancient past history of people and so on. So even my colleagues anthropologists would not agree with me, but one of the first examples of using the term and invention of the term ethnology comes from Austro-Hungarian Empire. Austrian Empire, at that time it was Habsburg Empire. Habsburg Empire was successfully liberating parts of the Balkans, especially Slavonia, Hungary, in the late 16th century, early 17th century, from the Ottomans. And when they did acquire new lands, the state itself needed data about way of life of people, their production, and the most efficient way how they can collect taxes from the people. So they needed knowledge about the people. And these people were not, well, let's say, well-civilized people. They were peasants. And for the peasants, they used practically the same idea of non-civilized people. So František Kolar, one of how to say, bureaucrats in Habsburg Empire, born in Slovakia, I'm not sure if in Bratislava or in Slovakia, would invent the term ethnology, which he would write as, he would define as discipline on nations and peoples, study of educated people, on origins, languages, customs, institutions of particular peoples, and finally of homeland and ancient leaders, in order to better assess peoples and nations in their own time. Pretty much historical, but at the same time very clearly explained reason for establishment of such a discipline. In Western anthropology, it was colonialism, not the only reason for establishment of anthropology, and anthropologists usually did not work for colonial administration. It was very rare, actually. But still, the need to establish knowledge of peoples was basically the same. How to exploit them. This is what it is. And what you actually are facing, if you are trying to understand ways of life of people, it is something we define as culture. And believe it or not, there is no way, I'm not saying no simple way, I am saying there is no way to define culture. In anthropology, since the 90s, we avoid as much as possible to use the term culture, because it either doesn't fit to empirical reality, or if it maybe does fit to empirical reality, it is not what we consider as what it is. Especially important is there is no relationship possible to have any kind of, let's say, sustainable relationship between the group of people and their culture. It is a complete illusion. It is impossible to find on the field, whenever you are doing field work, to find a group of people with one culture. It doesn't exist. It never existed in human history, and it will never exist. But we have this imagination of culture, of course. So the most efficient definition of culture is the oldest one we have in anthropology. It is Edward B. Taylor's from the late 19th century, 1871, saying approximately this: culture or civilization, taken in its wide comparative ethnographic sense, is that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, arts, moral law, custom, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. So if you try to read this from the end, culture is something we learn. Whatever is culture, it cannot have anything to do with our genome. It is not in genes. It cannot be. It is as simple as that. And furthermore, well, it is something we understand as a holistic way. It is combined from different parts, but the whole is complex. It is not complicated, it is complex. The distinction between complicated and complex issues is very simple. You can deal with complicated issues. You can diminish complicated issues to its parts and then rebuild them again. So, for example, you can how to say it, put the bicycle on its units from which it is composed, and you can recompose back a bicycle. You can't do it with culture. Whenever anything in culture changes, you never know what can be or which consequences that one simple change brought. So, giving the issue you are dealing with as designers is technology. So in technology, whenever we introduce new technology, we know everything will change. But we cannot know how it will change. Your task is usually to provide the best possible solutions in acceptance of new technologies. But you cannot ever know if it will work out or not. You have to test, you have to experiment, and you have to sometimes even ask people if they will use technology as you imagine. And it is impossible to know, and this is complex. Yes, computers changed our daily life, but I have to say I'm old enough to have my first experience with computers. I don't know if anybody from you knows how computers worked before with these sticks of paper cut on small units. You know, so for one small sentence of an algorithm, you would use, let's say, 0.5 meter of paper and test if it works or not. It was very boring, very frustrating, but basically this is the same as computers do it nowadays. So my imaginations of computers in the late 70s was very simple. We will have big computers somewhere and some monitors connected to these big computers from our homes. It didn't happen. Of course, we have now these personal computers. And when they were established or introduced, we all had in mind, wow, this will be great because it is decentralized, nobody will control us. Ha! If we are very smart, and if we know a lot about computing, we can use our computers without having traces and being somehow cut off. But even the best people in hacking computers are not always sure if they are hacked or not. So it is completely different. And we don't know what the future will bring to this. So this is culture. Imagine, for example, internet. In that moment, in one single moment, what is the internet? Empirically speaking, what is it? It is all information stored in computers plugged into the same network. But what it is in one single moment, empirically speaking, nobody knows. It is impossible to know. It is impossible to define. It is impossible to somehow stop and say this is internet in the moment. Because it is flow. It changes all the time. And this is culture. The best possible approximation is it is a flow which changes all the time. All the time changed surface of human practice. So, nothing human can stay beyond our anthropological gaze. This is quite clear for anthropologists. One of the anthropologists who was trying to provide some challenging issues for the near future and activities in coping with the present society is Paul Rabinow. He would do he would print quite interesting stuff, starting with essays on the anthropology of reason in 1996, then Anthropos Today, Reflections of Modern Equipment, and then Marking Time on the Anthropology of the Contemporary, and finally, this is not all he published, but this is the line I'm trying to follow here, Designs for an Anthropology of the Contemporary. Designs for the anthropology of the contemporary are quite, how to say, quite dispersed issues, and it is not something anthropologists would normally do. Anthropology, if it is a study or research of people's way of life, was much more, especially in the past, related to studies of remote people, exotic tribes, in the way of trying to understand the most ancient and the most attractive ancient way of life. Anthropologists would be especially fascinated finding the tribe which was uncontacted or unspoiled with civilization or whatever, and trying to find to explain how ancient people would live and how humanity is actually based if they are forced as human beings to live in nature. Well, this traditional to antiquity-oriented studies, especially of people who have nothing to do with European civilization, is in its essence not related to innovation, change, and so on. There were parts of anthropology which were actually designed to study cultural change, especially in the 30s and the 40s in the United States because of the processes of so-called acculturation, which means adaptation to novelties in culture. But to say it very bluntly, it is the moment in which a people will accept another culture from the dominant, especially from colonial powers, to adapt and change and diminish their own culture. So I will give you a recent example of these processes. I have a colleague in Ljubljana who is quite an extreme. I'm studying popular music, so I'm not a typical anthropologist. He is interested in this kind of exotic people who live in the present, the way of life as ancient people would do. You can find this kind of people in Papua New Guinea. So he went to study a small group of people at Sepik River in the late 80s, no, early 90s. And after 20 years, it happened that his people, this is the term anthropologists would usually use, suddenly decided, it was not pushed to them, but they suddenly decided, well, let's skip with old customs and take Christianity. This is Protestant Christianity. And they decided it on purpose, willingly, saying, no, from now on we will just get rid of all these traditions which are useless, we will become Christians. Imagine my colleague how he feels about this. It happened last year, actually, or 2 years ago, something like that. But people change, sometimes willingly, sometimes because they are forced to. They don't have many options, actually, in survival. So this, what Paul Rabinov was trying to say is, if we are trying to understand contemporary way of life and contemporary situations in which we find ourselves, anthropology is not enough. We have to do our studies in interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary or whatever, but to do it together with other people. So he established a studio in which people from different disciplines are engaged to, trying to cope with reality in the present life. So this is something I found the closest to something you do as designers, actually, in anthropology. But this is an example. This is an exception, not the rule. So if there is anything that might be very, very close to your interest, it is the last one. So designs for an anthropology of the contemporary and the near future, actually. Me, myself, studying music, it has always been the case that I could have not studied social activities related to music without considering change, constant change, and innovation, basically. In music, it is extremely important to follow the rules of the genre, but at the same time, to do this the way to be different from others. So you have to do double task. Being recognizable in the genre, this is especially important in metal, in many different genres or sub-genres of metal, but at the same time to have a specific sound, to have a specific attitude. And usually the most successful bands would be those who break the rule, who would broke in the past the main rules of the genre. So you have this tension, which is not so easily just to explain, between sustainability or transmission of ways of life and change, which is always innovative. And this was one of the initial issues I was coping with in the 90s already. But I will not show you some of those pictures I did at that time. But it is not common for anthropologists to study innovation or creativity. We have only a couple of examples, but this would be another topic of maybe one of my future presentations, if it ever happens. Okay. So what I'm trying now to do is to show you examples of applying anthropology, where and how we can apply anthropological knowledge. So imagine you have a knowledge which is as complex as culture, as diverse as culture, as diverse as humanity itself, and you can only use a couple of issues, and it is always, when you can use knowledge you acquire, you can only use knowledge in given situations. You can't have a knowledge which would be general anthropological knowledge usable for any other situation. No, it is always situationally based because it is acquired in the situation. So applying anthropology which simply involves using of knowledge, methods, and what is important, anthropological way of thinking. I demonstrated it in past 2 days because the way how anthropologists think is a bit specific, trying always to say, well, what if? Going beyond something that is just simply given. And examine these problems and issues of contemporary concern to bring about change. Of course, if there is any part of anthropology which has some relationship to design, it is applied anthropology. This is Podolewski's definition from a very small book I recommend for students in design. If you would like to know what anthropology is about, how anthropologists think, and you have only 3 hours, maybe 4 hours of time to do it, this is the book. You can use. It is very small, very simple, and usable for students, especially bachelor degree and master degree students. But even for us, professional anthropologists, it is a very good source of examples and thinking. So we have this applied, different kinds of application of ethnographic and anthropological knowledge. To say it very clear, ethnographic knowledge is knowledge based on these situations we study, and in the specific localized usually, or maybe somehow structurally particularized empirical stuff. But anthropological knowledge is much wider. We have some, of course, general concepts in anthropology. It is impossible to have discipline without the one. And I mentioned one yesterday. It is cultural evolution. It is a very specific topic developed in the 19th century already, but it is still a part of anthropology and re-examining of our knowledge constantly. Did we have a good idea about cultural evolution or not? Well, it is pretty much debatable, although people do not use concepts in cultural evolution nowadays. So let us try to see where we can apply knowledge, especially we can do it on the spot in everyday life, because our ethnographic experience is always dialogical. I will not go now into details about ethnography as a method. This is something I teach the first year students at our department, and we usually spend a couple of weeks in trying to give all aspects in ethnography, but something is extremely important in anthropological knowledge. There is no, let's say, empirical reality we can discover with ethnography. What is ethnography is always partly discovery of something existing, human practices, ways of life, and so on, but in its essence, it is always co-created story about the way of life. So we create this reality by our own experience, by questions, direct dialogue with people, and of course by further dialogue if you understand issues or if you do not understand issues, and so on and so forth. So for example, I will give you an example. I studied a rock club. This was my topic for my dissertation in the 90s, youth and rock club. And when I started on this project, I already did field work with a group who had this place for rehearsals, and their members did organize concerts in the venue. So I told the story of the rock group and touched this place. Then I started my ethnography of the place itself. Unfortunately, it was closed at the time of the beginning of my fieldwork, so my fieldwork was very specific, historical, but still with people who were engaged at that time. These were all people of my age, or even older. And what came out is one of the first issues I have got, or let's say first responses from people from the club when I started studying club was, Rajko, you didn't understand anything at all. You've got it completely wrong. And I said, okay, fine, I understand. I didn't understand the point. I didn't do this ethnography. So after 3 years, when I finished my work on the rock club, I published the monograph, and guess what happened? The guys from the band would say, Rajko, you're a complete stupid guy. How could you listen to this? Well, these were basically female persons who were in charge of leading the club, so these women. You're a complete idiot. You didn't understand. So I have two different stories of the same situation, and I say both are okay, because both are valid for some people engaged in them, and I didn't invent neither. I did co-invent with people who were involved. And this is how anthropologists actually create knowledge. So ethnography is an invention in a very specific sense, but it is always co-created by people who are involved in these studies. So it is not given. That means we learn by engagement. This is Michael Carritter's term, engaged learning. We learn all the time by our own physical and bodily engagement in reality. And it is always mutual, practical and mutual issue. Then we have applications in economy or industry. We can have applications in industry, for-profit industry, which is from non-profit industry, or economy, which is quite clear. We can have applications in state policies, public service, although I have to say the state policies is an issue which is definitely something anthropologists are very rarely asked to give an advice, because it is always, or almost always, in direct confrontation with existing state policies. With some exception it may be, but usually we have quite specific view coming from, of course, below. We have these applications in education, culture, heritage, design even, but I will speak more about design anthropology closing to the end of my presentation. I hope I'm not, well, I still have some time. So, extremely important is application in education, and I see the most important part of what we do at the moment is how to introduce anthropology to either primary school education or at least to secondary school education. This is absolutely a must at the moment, especially because of all these trends we are facing in Europe with migrations and non-understanding of specific historical, let's say, circumstances, so why people leave their places and migrate, and so on and so forth. But this is so obvious that I don't need much time. And there is, of course, a permanent engagement in something we can call global or local flows, so changing situations in the local environments and in the global sense at the same time. So we can apply anthropology almost everything, in almost every possible setting and in almost any activity you can imagine, even in sports. We have anthropological studies of football. I don't think we don't. So, in one sense, the business anthropology, which is called nowadays business anthropology, started as industrial anthropology at the beginning of the 20th century in the United States. One of the most important projects was Hawthorne project. I will not give you details about this Hawthorne project, but what came out from observation of people in their working environment was very simple. Workers in working environment create their own conditions of work much more than people who are leading the working process and their bosses would like to know or like to design for them, to plan. So we have many kinds of this anthropology in business, in economic enterprises nowadays. To mention the situation in the United States, because Europe is a bit specific, and I will not go into specificities in Europe. In United States, approximately more than half of practicing anthropologists are nowadays engaged in this kind of applied anthropology. Half of them would be academics. So you can see this enterprise and this kind of anthropologists. Organizational anthropology is important, advertising anthropology, marketing anthropology, anthropology of consumption, anthropology of work and management at the same time, and again, design anthropology. So, for example, in edited volume Anthropology and Business, we can find reports on work in medicine, finances, family firms, technology, technological enterprises, energy, trusts and funds, design, marketing, advertising and branding. Business world is not monolith, neither good on itself or bad. I think this is extremely important because we have some colleagues in anthropology who would say, you will never, how to say it, do business for business because it is the worst thing you can do for human beings. Well, some business can provide services for human beings which are good. And some businesses, of course, are destructive. To say you do not work for business is, in my opinion, completely misleading. The Society for Applied Anthropology is the oldest society of this kind in America, established in 1941. I'm not sure how much time do I have, but let's go into Europe. We have not in Europe. We still are in the global. Global sphere, because I'm a member of this IOIS executive committee, as the World Organization of Anthropologists. We have some commissions, for example, of anthropology of policies and practice, enterprise anthropology, and commission of indigenous knowledge and sustainable development. Maybe I can tell something about this to the end. And now coming to Europe, we established working group or a network on applied anthropology. I hope it will work. I didn't test it before. Usually we have this problem, yes. So I have to exit our PowerPoint presentation to make it work. Oops. Where is it now? So we established a network for applied anthropology a couple of years ago. I think it was 5 years ago, and it organizes one day or this time it will be 2 days event, Why the World Needs Anthropologists. This time it will be organized in Estonia, Tartu. And I know some of people from this university will attend. It is a great example of exchange of knowledge and experience in this field. But I have some very nice pictures to show you up to the end of the presentation. So I will try to run fast forward. Sorry. Is it on? Yes. So we have this Why the World Needs Anthropologists. I didn't mention the organization. Basic organization is EASA, European Association of Social Anthropologists, which is quite big nowadays. So there are journals in applied and anthropology. The most important is Human Organization for those who might be interested in applied anthropology issues, although I'm not sure how much available it is. But in the last decade, there was enormous shift and enormous rise of applied anthropology journals and activities throughout the world. So, for example, we have now International Journal for Business Anthropology. We have Journal of Business Anthropology, well, international and journal. These are two different, obviously designed at the same time. This one is open access, the Journal of Business Anthropology. I will not open it because it is too complicated. And we have another journal which is older, Anthropology of Work. Work situations are extremely important part of anthropological expertise, how people actually manage to work together in organizations. And we have another open access, at least as far as I know, it is open access, the so-called EPIC conferences, annual conferences on applied anthropology, the Ethnographic Praxis in Industry conference, and they would publish yearbooks with very interesting papers about application of anthropological knowledge. I really, it used to be available, I'm not sure for the moment because I didn't test, but it was available online, all these yearbooks. This year it will be organized in the United States. So, coming to design anthropology, there was a recently published book on design anthropology, but one of the first anthropologists who were somehow employed in design for Xerox companies in the 70s was Lucy Sackman, and she wrote that all we need is not so much to reinvent anthropology as or for design, then a critical anthropology of design. That means we have to follow what is going on in design, and we have to critically examine what actually is the result of designing. So the first, well, I'm not sure if it is the first, but one of the first, let's say so, volumes on design anthropology, although this field was developed in the past 30 years, came only in 2013. I even don't know by name all those authors, Gunn, Otto, and Smith. So they would say that what is important in design anthropology is how people perceive, create, and transform their environments through their everyday activities. I think this is the main contribution anthropologists can give to design activities, simply to follow while doing things in design and later critically examine how people use products in design or services or whatever is the result of design. So, design is a process of thought planning, often depicted as universal human capacity, which somehow sets human kind of part of nature. And we have these actions guided by hopes, dreams, and promises. This is Gott and Ingold. So design is not so much about innovation as about improvisation. I think this is extremely important, that innovation itself is a process we can somehow impose, but improvisation of people, both in real living conditions, and I will end my presentation with some examples of this kind of improvisation, is something that anthropologists in real time, with real people in real life, can follow. because we usually do it this way. So let me summarize these sustainability issues, if I may, before I will present you some pictures for the end. We have sustainability in material. One possibility is preservation of existing material products. So, for example, if we are speaking about architecture, I was very much, how to say, not frustrated, but somehow a bit surprised, realizing that people used to use stones from either fortification walls or other objects to build their houses. So it could have happened many times, and exactly in the village I did my field work on the Rock Club. It happened that half of the fortification of one castle was used for building houses of peasants. And it is a common practice around the world. You never simply throw away stones. I'm speaking now about stones. Sometimes it may be wood, sometimes it may be some other materials, but usually stone is the most valuable material. So you rebuild. You build new houses from old stones. So what was before castle became a peasant house, in a way. So this new use of recycling is something that is embedded into activities of human beings in all places and all times. It's not something that is trendy, as it is nowadays. Then we have social sustainability, which is, again, a matter of another lecture. What is important is we have to divide two types of sustainability in our social relationship. One is structural, built on rules. We can somehow decipher, although people who obey them do not know all rules. And contingent. So the temporary built relationship among human beings, which are sustainable as long as there is interest of human beings to do. And the most difficult task for social scientists is to decipher if it is structural or is it contingent. Nowadays, when we have the Deleuzian approach in anthropology, we have complete mess. Because nobody knows what is structural and what is not structural. And nobody cares anymore about it. Finally, the most easy part of this sustainability is living practices. We have some traditional practices we are trying to preserve. We have some provisional and transitory practices, and of course we have to understand this human dimensions of innovation. But living practices is again a conglomerate of many different things, habits, or habitus in Bourdieuian sense, and practices which are constantly re-innovated, especially in craftsmanship. You always find this tension between innovation and tradition. You always have to follow something you learned, but at the same time, if you do not include new technologies and new ideas into your craftsmanship, you will never sell your products. It is as easy as that. So practices themselves are so important that we have in UNESCO's definition of heritage, we have this so-called intangible heritage, which is basically human practices. So, to finalize my point is, I will now give you two examples. One is from my own ethnographic practice, another one, the first one will be from my regional, let's say, experience. I usually do not use photographs from internet or Facebook, but this time I did it. And not because I would follow these rules of how is it called?
Copyright?
Copyright, thank you very much. But simply because I don't find it well. I don't feel well with this. But let us try to think how people in the Balkans, you might know that people in the Balkans are well known for wars and improvisation. Or both, whatever. So we have some pictures from Bosnia and from Serbia. I took them from Facebook. So this is the first one. So the second one will show us even more inventive approach. So these are all real pictures. This is not something mashed up. Or if you would like to play basketball at your local road, you can do it. Oh, this one is very effective. So this is the difference between design and what people do. Or let's say this kind of inventiveness. I was thinking, does it work or doesn't it work? I'm not sure. It might work. So, and I like this one, shoes, you see. Or this use of skis. Why would you bother to cut them if you can leave them? Or whatever this is this a house, a machine, or working machine, whatever it is? This is pretty typical for Serbia. Or this one. I imagine this might be something you can face in Hong Kong. All this inventiveness. This guy could make a patent for this device. Or the last one is this one. You have to imagine the motorcycle, which is an old Slovenian Tomos motorbike, very slow but very robust at the same time, but small motorbike. So people do these kind of things all the time, of course. And the last one will be for Laura. You have to obey the rules. So the very last part of my presentation, I hope I still have 3 minutes and a half, is my own work with. There is no direct translation. Grassroots-based places of resistance, or music venues, or whatever. So wild or original is a term we invented together with people involved in these activities. So as I told you, my primary interest is popular music. And in 2011 we have got a kind of possibility to do a research of youth and music clubs in Slovenia by the agency or the office of the youth in Slovenia. So we did it. And we invented the term together of the so-called wild, original, or grassroots venues. Venues I call for resistance. So this book is a kind of a result, and this is one of the examples of things you can do with your, I wouldn't say informants, because it is not a true term, it is collaborators. So it was a book written together, something like 12, maybe 13 people were involved in writing this book, although I did, of course, the great part of it, more than 2/3 of the whole book. It is still a collaborative approach and a collaborative result of this. I will not tell you what the meaning of it is. But we did examine some venues in which you can find some squats here in Ljubljana, in Maribor, in eastern Slovenia, and some youth clubs, which one of them doesn't exist anymore, this one here. And mostly it is clubs or places in which you can find a situation when people from the area would somehow do their job in organizing their activities. This is a typical office of one of such clubs, with a guy who spent almost his entire life in it. These are doors in one of the oldest venues, which celebrated 50 years of its existence in past week. In very small town in Slovenia, Ilirska Bistrica, you can't imagine how small towns can produce these kind of venues, in which, for example, punk rock bands from the United States would say, if you played in Ilirska Bistrica, then you passed the test. You're good enough. I'm not joking, this was true. So this is another picture from the same place. Usually you would design it to be humanly used. It is not sterile. but it is always a kind of artistically equipped place in which you can simply feel good. And you don't have many such places because you have either bars or some, let's say, conventional centers. So this is one of those discussions about the future of such venues. This was taken in Maribor in one squatted place. And now, just to show you two examples of my own fieldwork and how you can imagine anthropologists doing fieldwork in such environments. This was the reason just to say, this is the place near Murska Sobota, in Beltinci. Again, you improvise, you use all this material from the past, you don't buy and make equipment, but this is part of my fieldwork in Japan. I did studies of popular music venues in the town Kanazawa, in the north of Japan. And this was the final party they organized for me, the local people in the jazz club, which was one important venue of my work. So, and of course, this is 15 years ago. It's obvious. But this is more recent. Again, this is how we do fieldwork usually. Just engaging, talking to people. But what is important in fieldwork is not that we only take notes and just communicate with people, but simply we are part, not becoming part of the situation. We are trying to get close as much as possible to understand what is going on. And sometimes even in understanding of this kind of, this is a squatted venue, takes quite some time. So the problem for anthropologists is that it is almost impossible. I couldn't have done this kind of study in 3 months. This was only 3 months we did have. If the people who were engaged did not participate, if I would be alone, I would never be able to do it. So these people contributed in the book I mentioned before. But what is the problem of anthropology is we need time. We simply need time. You can't do a good ethnography in a very short period of time, and you can't get results in, let's say, 5 or 10 lines saying this is as it is. It's impossible. We always are engaged into this and making this kind of stories until the end. So, the final idea I have to share with you is, I will not present you, but you can just simply note this Drive Green project. It is a project by one of my colleagues in the department, a younger one, who is doing comparative habits of drivers in Ljubljana, Belgrade, Istanbul, I think it is Budapest and Newcastle. He is at the moment in Newcastle, trying to figure out how the drivers can, let's say, diminish the level of pollution, but at the same time to spare some money for fuel. Then we have these corporate, state-based organizations, but what I find important, where we can find these models of sustainable innovation, for me it is common, or more precisely the new commons. We always forget that the most sustainable part of existence of human beings is what we share. And we don't understand as property, and we do not understand it as a kind of culture. It is something that exists. The notion of the commons in English is something I think is the most important in human innovation, which is sustainable. And this kind of venues I study are, in my opinion, the new commons. And you have, of course, the creative commons in publications of online products, and you have many different kinds of the commons. So this common, not public, common, is something I see as the most important part we have to develop. And this is the last issue I have to share with you. And thank you for your attention.
your presentation. So I think we still have some minutes if you want to put some questions or comments.
I wanted to ask you, as an anthropologist, when you engage with people in this field work, how do you manage your personality so it doesn't influence the way you are engaging with people? You tend to be neutral.
So this is impossible. You can't be neutral. If I'm a 54 years old professor, I may be a Marxist or an anarchist, and I have to tell them. I can't be neutral. It's impossible. Being a Marxist, it's impossible to be neutral.
But I'm asking.
But yes, I have further answer. This is general in this orientation. It is impossible to create any social science neutral. It doesn't work. It is always biased. Every single social sciences paper is biased, politically, sexually, by the frame of your class. Believe it or not, I'm coming from working class environment. But the vast majority of anthropologists I know are middle class. And imagine, working class perspective is different from middle class perspective. And working class people cannot afford becoming anthropologists because they don't have money. As simple as that. So it is still, no, I still didn't finish. And then you come to the point of direct encounter with people. This is the easiest. When you are doing fieldwork, you are a human being. And if you behave as a human being, you will never have any problem. This is as simple as that. So whenever you are encountering people in the field, you do it the same way as in your ordinary life. So imagine when you have friends, and you have people you simply do not want to be your friends, in the field, you simply try not to make friends and not to make enemies by being just ordinary human being. But you definitely behave the same way as in your normal way of life, and as a human being you know when you will come to troubles and when you will not.
So we have to balance our field work not to be too intrusive, not
Definitely
to be...
not intrusive. Yes.
So I was asking more in the sense of advisors for
usually,
conducting field study with people.
I mentioned this time in anthropology. It is very important because we need a lot of time to establish this kind of relationship, which are human-like relationship. You can't just walk into the house asking people and go.
Yes.
This is not how we do ethnography. Usually we wait until they ask us, what do you want to know from us? And it takes time.
Another question, sorry.
Thank you for your interesting presentation. If I need an advocate for, let's say, for anthropology, I will hire you because you do it really good. But I have also some doubts about that because I'm also happy that, let's say, you as an anthropologist cannot claim the truth in let's say, in how you do research and not. Because if we would follow you, we couldn't do any research on human people in relation to products or in relation to the environment, because you are very strict in that, let's say, because you say everything is, let's say, dependent on the situation, on the person. There is no culture in general. You cannot study culture. I don't agree with that, because, let's say, it depends on
Because
also,
people believe in culture.
it depends also on the way you define the variables, of course. I mean, and happily, I think, let's say, research is always good if you have a kind of mixed method approach. You know, on the one hand, you can do some quantitative research, on the other hand, let's say, the qualitative approach. And I know you are, let's say, of course, only in the qualitative approach. Let's say, you can study culture as long as you have a kind of operational definition of it. And maybe that is not, let's say, the definition for the whole world of culture, but a certain aspect. I can, let's say, when I'm living in Korea, I can feel the difference. I know the difference between, let's say, two cultures, between my country and the Netherlands and Korea, there are absolutely differences, and I can study that as well, I think. The same with, let's say, if you have a topic like creativity. I studied creativity, for example, but not creativity, let's say, in all its kind of broadness and wideness, etc. But let's say I have an operational definition and I follow that. And everyone can say, oh, but you did this, what you did is not right. But at least, let's say, that is open for discussion and open for, let's say, yeah, do you know my point?
Yes, unfortunately I have an answer.
Well, I mean, I hope so.
I can maybe add something from anthropological perspective. Actually, from my experience, and I'm going to present later on the work that I don't go to details, I think anthropological research ethnography can serve as, it can spur the creativity. It can serve as initial part, and later on as observation, and as you were saying, working in collaboration. But that is what we are actually all learning. How to speak the same language, how to work interdisciplinary, and how to translate ethnography to such kind of work.
Right, yeah. No, I'm a buyer of, let's say, ethnographic studies, absolutely. So don't misunderstand me. But let's say you cannot claim as an anthropologist that this is the only true how you should study, let's say, any, let's say, human phenomenon.
Anthropologically.
Anthropologically.
I'm also an anthropologist.
One
I'm
last
also an
question,
I'm also an
please.
anthropologist, and since very early days, we used to learn and to know about the participant observation and how we should distance ourselves and look at ourselves, in a position not to get so involved with that person or that character, but to build up the trust. And when we build up that factor of trust, then we do get them calling us and opening up to us. And that's what we need. We are just listeners. And then we analyze what we have, just got out of. Of course, that, as you said at the beginning, it's very difficult to get ourselves, totally away, or is it a very sort of influence in our sort of ethnographic work, or even on the research side. But still, we can be quite fair on that sort of judgment.
And there is one, maybe a part of the answer to the colleague. Before, anthropology is not about becoming the native.
Yeah.
If you become a native, then you're no more anthropologist. So this is the point, we always have distance. And we create distance and we understand that there is always a distance between us and them, let's say so. But as far as culture is concerned, in 1952, Kreber and Klakman made an overview of all possible definitions of culture so far, up to 1922. And nobody knows how many definitions they actually made. You can find 161, 164 classes of definitions. I once even counted all these definitions, and I'm not sure if I'm correct, 164. Since then, we have many more coming new. At the same time, Leslie White, another anthropologist, was trying to shift the notion of symbol from noun to verb. It was not successful, unfortunately. He said specificity of a human being is to be able to symbol. Not to symbolize or to make symbols, but to create symbols, to use symbols and to change symbols, to symbol. It didn't work.